Johnny Carson was laughing. The audience was roaring. And then Robin Williams stopped performing, looked into Johnny's eyes, and the studio froze. It was March 1982. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B in Burbank. Robin Williams was the guest, the young comedian who had exploded onto the scene as Mork from the Planet Ork, the manic improviser who could riff on anything, the performer who seemed incapable of sitting still. He'd been on the show 8 times already. Johnny loved having him. Robin was great television, unpredictable, fast, hilarious. He could fill 12 minutes of airtime with pure stream of consciousness brilliance. Producers loved him because you never had to worry about dead air. Robin Williams didn't do dead air. Tonight was following the familiar pattern. Robin had walked out to thunderous applause, hugged Johnny, dropped into the orange guest chair and immediately launched into an improvised bit about airline food that had the audience howling. Johnny was laughing, that genuine Carson laugh that couldn't be faked. Ed McMahon was wiping tears from his eyes. Robin shifted seamlessly from airlines to politicians to his childhood dog to doing impressions of Doc Severinsen's jackets. The energy was electric. Classic Robin Williams. Classic Tonight Show magic? And then, mid-sentence, Robin stopped. Not a pause for effect. Not a beat for timing. A complete stop. He'd been doing a bit about his father, something funny about military discipline meeting comedy chaos. The audience was laughing. Johnny was smiling, waiting for the punchline. But Robin's face changed. The manic energy drained away. He looked at Johnny, really looked at him, with an expression the host had never seen on the young comedian's face before. "Johnny," Robin said, his voice suddenly quiet, completely stripped of performance. "Can I ask you something real?" The audience's laughter died. The studio went silent. Johnny's smile faded slightly. He leaned back in his chair, one hand coming up near his chin. "Of course," he said carefully, sensing something had shifted. Carson stopped mid-laugh. The entire studio froze. Robin leaned forward in the guest chair, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. The cameras stayed locked on him. In the control room, director Bobby Quinn was frantically gesturing. Should they cut? Go to commercial? This wasn't the script. This wasn't the Robin Williams they'd booked. "How do you do it?" Robin asked, his eyes locked on Johnny's. "How do you sit in this chair every night for 20 years and make it look so easy? How do you carry all that weight and never let anyone see it?" The question hung in the air. Johnny's expression shifted, surprise, then something deeper. Something vulnerable. "What weight?" Johnny asked, but his voice betrayed that he knew exactly what Robin meant. "The weight of being Johnny Carson," Robin said. "Of being the person America turns to before they go to sleep. Of having to be funny when you don't feel funny. Of having to smile when your world is falling apart. How do you do that?" Ed McMahon shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The audience was completely silent, 300 people collectively holding their breath. Doc Severinsen lowered his trumpet, sensing this was no longer a comedy show. Johnny was quiet for a long moment. His hand moved from his chin to the edge of his desk, fingers tapping once, twice. Anyone who knew him recognized the gesture. Johnny Carson buying time, deciding whether to answer honestly or deflect with a joke. He chose honesty. "You want to know the real answer?" Johnny said, his voice soft but carrying through the studio. "Yes," Robin said simply. "You don't," Johnny said. "You don't do it. You survive it." To understand what happened next, you need to understand what was happening in Johnny Carson's life in March 1982. On the surface, everything was perfect. The Tonight Show was the undisputed king of late-night television. Johnny was the most powerful person in show business. A single appearance on his show could make a career. His approval could turn unknowns into stars overnight. But behind that desk, behind that smile, Johnny Carson was drowning. His third marriage was falling apart. Joanna Carson, his wife of 8 years, was filing for divorce. The proceedings were brutal, public, expensive. The tabloids were having a field day. Johnny's private pain was becoming public spectacle. His relationship with his 3 sons from his first marriage was strained almost to breaking. His oldest son, Christopher, had recently told him they needed space. His middle son, Ricky, was struggling with substance abuse. His youngest, Corey, barely spoke to him. And just 2 weeks earlier, Johnny had received news that his younger brother, Dick Carson, was seriously ill. Dick had been a director on The Tonight Show for years. They'd worked together, traveled together, survived their difficult childhood together. Now Dick was in the hospital, and the doctors weren't optimistic. Johnny had told no one. Not the producers. Not Ed. Not even his closest friends. He'd simply shown up every night at 5:30 p.m., gone through makeup, reviewed his monologue, walked out onto that stage at 11:30 and made America laugh for 90 minutes before driving home alone to an empty house. For 20 years, Johnny Carson had perfected the art of compartmentalization. Of keeping the performance separate from the pain. Of never letting the audience see behind the curtain. Until tonight. When a 30-year-old comedian with wild eyes and a gift for seeing through bullshit looked at him and asked the one question nobody had ever asked on live television. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Survive it? Robin repeated, still leaning forward, still locked into this moment of unexpected honesty. That's the secret? Just survival? Johnny smiled, but it wasn't his TV smile. It was something sadder, more real. Robin, you're young. You're brilliant. You're going to have an incredible career. But let me tell you something nobody tells you when you start in this business. He paused, his fingers tapping the desk again. The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the studio lights. The spotlight doesn't warm you. Johnny continued. It just makes the shadows deeper. You can have 300 people laughing at your jokes and still feel completely alone. You can be in millions of homes every night and go home to an empty house. The more successful you become, the harder it gets to remember who you actually are underneath the performance. Robin nodded slowly. Your divorce, he said quietly. I'm sorry. I know that's private, but it's in every newspaper in the country. Johnny interrupted, not unkindly. Nothing's private when you sit in this chair. Everything becomes content. Even your pain. So how do you deal with it? Johnny reached into his desk drawer. He pulled out a small object, a pen. Not expensive, not fancy. Just a regular ballpoint pen, worn from use, the kind you'd find in any office supply store. You see this? Johnny held it up. The cameras zoomed in slightly. In the control room, Bobby Quinn had stopped panicking and started rolling. Whatever this was, it was real television. My father gave me this pen in 1957, Johnny said. I was doing a local show in Omaha. Making almost nothing. Dreaming about maybe, someday, getting a shot at something bigger. My father wasn't a warm man. Didn't say I love you. Didn't give compliments. But one day he handed me this pen and said, write your own material. Don't let anyone else tell your story. Johnny turned the pen over in his fingers. I've carried this pen in my desk for 25 years. Through 3 marriages. Through my mother's death. Through fights with network executives and bad ratings and good ratings and everything in between. And you know what I realized? What? Robin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. My father wasn't talking about comedy, Johnny said. He was talking about life. He was telling me to write my own story. Not the story the tabloids write. Not the story the audience expects. My story? The real one. He looked directly at Robin. You asked me how I do this. The truth is, some nights I don't know. Some nights I walk out here and I'm so tired and sad and empty that I don't know how I'm going to get through the monologue. But I look at this pen before I go on, and I remember, I get to write how this goes. Not perfectly. Not easily. But it's mine. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. The control room was chaos. Fred de Cordova, the executive producer, was on the phone with NBC executives. "Is Carson having a breakdown on live television?" someone was shouting. Bobby Quinn had his hand over his headset microphone, trying to hear the conversation on stage over the noise in the control room. But on stage, Johnny had made a decision. He stood up from behind his desk. In 30 years of broadcasting, from his first local show in Lincoln, Nebraska to 20 years hosting The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson had never, not once, left his desk during an interview. The desk was his fortress. His safety zone. The physical barrier between Johnny Carson the person and Johnny Carson the performer. Now he walked around it. The audience gasped. Ed McMahon's mouth fell open. Doc Severinsen actually stood up from his position with the band, unsure what was happening. Johnny walked over to Robin's chair and did something even more unprecedented. He sat down on the edge of the orange guest chair beside Robin, the two of them now sitting together, facing the audience. "Here's what they don't tell you," Johnny said, addressing not just Robin but the entire studio, the cameras, the millions watching at home. "Everyone thinks success means you've figured it out. That once you're at the top, everything gets easier. But it doesn't. It gets harder. Because now you have something to lose. Now people are counting on you. Now your failures are public." Robin was nodding, tears visible in his eyes. 2 weeks ago, Johnny continued, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "My brother went into the hospital. He directed this show for years. He's one of the best people I know. And I haven't told anyone because I'm supposed to be Johnny Carson, and Johnny Carson doesn't bring his problems to work. Johnny Carson makes people laugh." He held up the pen again. "But this pen reminds me that I'm also just John William Carson from Norfolk, Nebraska. And that person is allowed to hurt. That person is allowed to be scared. That person is allowed to not have all the answers. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming." Robin Williams stood up. Without saying a word, he reached out and took the pen from Johnny's hand. Johnny looked surprised. "Robin, let me hold it for a minute," Robin said softly. He turned to face the audience, still holding the pen, his usual manic energy completely absent. When he spoke, his voice carried through the silent studio with unexpected gravity. "I came on this show tonight to be funny," Robin said. "To do bits about my crazy life and make Johnny laugh and entertain America before bed. That's the job, right? That's what we do. We're the clowns. We're supposed to make the pain go away for 90 minutes. He looked down at the pen in his hand. "But Johnny just told us something true. Something vulnerable. Something that probably scared the hell out of him to say on live television. And I think..." He paused, his voice catching. "I think that's more important than any joke I could tell." Robin walked back to Johnny, still sitting on the edge of the guest chair. He knelt down, actually knelt on the studio floor, so they were eye level. "Thank you," Robin said, pressing the pen back into Johnny's hand and closing Johnny's fingers around it. "Thank you for reminding me that it's okay to be human. That we don't have to perform every second. That sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit we're struggling." Johnny's jaw clenched. His eyes were wet. He gripped Robin's shoulder with his free hand. "You're going to be okay, kid," Johnny said quietly. "Just remember, write your own story. Don't let this business write it for you." Robin nodded, unable to speak. He stood up and returned to the guest chair. Johnny walked back behind his desk, carefully placing the pen in its usual spot. The audience erupted. Not laughter this time. Applause. Long, sustained, emotional applause. People standing, crying, witnessing something that transcended entertainment. Johnny wiped his eyes quickly, trying to regain composure. "We'll be right back," he said, and the show went to commercial. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. During the break, Johnny told Robin his brother would recover. He did. And Johnny kept that pen in his desk drawer until his final show in 1992. Years later, after Robin Williams died in 2014, Johnny's family revealed something. Johnny had written Robin a letter the week before his own death in 2005. In it, he thanked Robin for that night in 1982. For making it okay to be real. The pen is now in the Smithsonian. Next to it, a note in Johnny's handwriting. Write your own story. JC. That night changed late-night television forever. Because Johnny Carson showed the world that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop performing and just be human.